I'm going to be honest with you. I really don't want to die. It's just that I really enjoy my life, spending time with my family, seeing the world, and surfing every day. Most days, I want to ignore the fact that I'll just be a speck of dust in an infinite universe. But what if facing our mortality was actually the way to live a fulfilling and happy life? In this video, I speak with Maura McInerney Raleigh, who's had many experiences with death, losing her mother at a young age, working in hospice care, and founding the company Hello Mortal, which helps you contemplate and prepare for your own death. But before we jump into this video, I coach a lot of high-performing and ambitious professionals who are driven by, guess what? Their own mortality. It turns out that mortality for many of them is a fear of actually not fully living your purpose, not living in alignment. And we have a group coaching cohort program that will help you do that with like-minded peers over at radreads.co/coaching. Here's my interview with Maura. Let's start with, I asked the question before we recorded, should we make the question, should we fear death or should we fear dying? And you said that there was a lot of nuance in
Yes.
those questions. Can you say more about that?
Yes. I see death and dying as two distinct moments in time. And often talking about Ernest Becker, he says that all all anxiety, if you dig deep enough, can be linked to an anxiety of death.
Hmm.
Now, it resonates immediately with some people, and with others, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Um, I'm a big believer in that, though.
Me too.
And so sometimes, when you're talking about the fear of death, I experienced this throughout my evolution and learning in this industry through grieving personal losses, through being a professional in hospice, that a fear of death sometimes can feel very surface level. For me, at least at first, it was, I was afraid to die because I was afraid of the pain. Well,
Hmm.
for most circumstances, death actually isn't painful. And I say that in two ways. One is that it's really the disease process is what is painful, the breakdown of organs and whatnot, and how the disease is impacting your body. But death itself is pretty painless, and modern medicine can help with that. Now, obviously, if you have a traumatic accident or something occurs, there are moments where death might be considered painful. But then there's the other part of fear of death, which is fear of becoming irrelevant, fear of lost memories, fear of losing loved ones, all those different fears, which actually was one of the parts that I really felt deeply connected to as I was creating Death Archetypes, which is one of our projects. It's a tool for contemplation. It's a contemplative personality test centered around the question, who are you in the face of life's impermanence? And there's 8 archetypes, and each archetype has a biggest fear. As well as other things. But it was going through those top regrets of the dying and biggest fears that really cemented to me there's a lot of different fears associated with death. And for the most part, people don't spend the time to think or discuss or contemplate what that fear actually is for them.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, kid. I think I might have shared this when we spoke before, but I wanted to share with you briefly kind of my own experience with kind of fear of death and this kind of I think it's actually a very sterile container now that I
Mm,
think about it in my own experience. And so I had this very kind of strange, or it feels strange to me, experience in that up until age 40 or so, I'm 44. So up until 4 years ago, I never really experienced death because my grandparents died when I was very young. Or losing someone. My father's side of the family died during a genocide in Cambodia, for the most part. Um, and then, aunts, uncles, friends, up until age 40, with the exception of my mom's best friend. That's kind of the only memory I have of someone close to us dying. 40 years without thinking about death much, and being kind of not having to grieve personally. Maybe that's another way to phrase it. In the past 4 years, I lost my father-in-law to one very close friend, another friend. And so I've had much more kind of hands-on experience. But I would say that I always had this fear of death since I was little. And this, I've probably said this on a podcast before, so I'll say briefly. I had this recurring nightmare when I was little, probably like 8 years old, I think. And the nightmare was, like the opening scene in Star Wars where there's the like endless stars coming towards the spaceship, like
Yes.
in the cockpit. And so it was like these endless stars coming at me in this dream. And there was, I think it was a rock. And as the stars moved close or further, I guess, the rock would get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, 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 and then it would disappear. And I had this nightmare, and I would wake up in like cold sweats from this, age 8, 10. And to me, I don't think I could verbalize it at the time, but obviously it was very scary because it was a nightmare. It wasn't a dream.
Yeah.
And what I realized maybe in my 20s or 30s was like, that was maybe like my sense of self kind of slowly disappearing and then like into like the infinite time. The way my scientific brain would describe this was we are finite beings in infinite time space. And I think as someone who's like very like engineering based, I used to I used to believe I was an atheist. Now I'm, somewhere in the middle, agnostic. I don't like that word, but spiritual. But it was just a very much, and I know many of our listeners can relate to this. It's like when the day comes, it's like game over. And what I thought, and so that was this like fear that I've had from childhood. And then when I started to write, I would talk a lot about like my fear of death. And I would think about it. I was like, well, what does that actually mean? It's like, I'm actually not that scared of the pain of dying. For many of the reasons that you've described, and for a twisted reason that I have like an insanely high pain threshold. And so the pain of it the pain of anything has never really scared me, physical pain. That was one. Then there's the loss of losing people who you love, and the loss of losing people who you love, like at the wrong time, like losing a child or losing a friend, Then there's the dying and not having lived, right? Like kind of going like leading a bland life, or however you want to describe it, right? And so all those, and that one was one that really stuck with me. But when I quit and like if I died tomorrow, I'm like I've done everything I wanted to do up until this point in my life. I really have. And I would be very sad. But I also my cup is very full. Like I've done what I want to do with my life. But the thing that, I know, sorry, I just cut you off, but the thing that what really is like the fear of death for me was actually this question of relevance. It's like, I didn't want, like, I was more scared that like in 50 years, no one's going to talk about me, where intellectually I know that whether they talk about me or not doesn't fucking matter.
Right. But it's still a fear. Well, I mean, ultimately, what I hear themes of too for a lot of people is this the fear of the unknown. So depending on your religious affiliation or beliefs, that also drives whether or not you have a fear of death. Because if you don't have any opinions on what happens after death, it's a big unknown, great mystery of our life universe. Like, but if you do have beliefs about what happens after death, you're more inclined to have hope, have comfort, be less afraid, so to speak, of that unknown.
Yeah. Is the only gateway to that, though, religion / spirituality?
No, I don't think so at all. Yeah. Yeah.
What are other gateways with mystery?
If you're someone who is very science or evidence based, like certainly you could be also religious, but maybe not, and that could certainly have an impact on on what you believe. And many people too, um, these are things that will change as
Mm,
you have experience, as you witness deaths in person, or experience your own near death experience, or health scare or diagnosis. Um,
mhm.
all of these life moments and situations can definitely play into that.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear, you kind of entered the world of death like professionally. I know that's probably it's like the strangest intro I've ever sequitur I've ever done, but you became a death doula, which I'd love to hear more about. And then you worked in hospice, but you said that there was that event or a series of
Hmm.
events that kind of led you into that. Can you talk about those?
Yeah. So one was definitely a while ago, and then one was more recent, and I want to share the one that was a while ago just to sort of shed light on it. To see how it connects the dots. But basically, after my mom died when I was in college, um, I found solace in a peer grief group. So I had felt really isolated because I was 20 years old. I didn't know anyone who'd lost a parent. None of my friends had lost a parent. And from the time I got the phone call to the time we had her funeral, uh, uh, the time I got the phone call to come home because she was dying to the time we planned her funeral was 2 weeks. So I did get to spend some time with her briefly while she was on hospice. So that experience completely changed my life. I was there with my mom as she died. Um, and then when I went back to college, and that's a whole other story because of getting into, I was super afraid of what would happen to me if I didn't go back.
Mhm.
And I ended up going back and found solace in this peer grief group, but it was at the same time as one of my college classes, and ironically the class was about death and dying in other cultures. And for me, I was I was an anthropology minor, and this class, it was to fill one of my credits, but at the same time I was also finding solace in learning about how are other
Good.
cultures
Yeah.
dealing with this. What are their rituals? What does it look like? And so I actually was really enjoying that class, and people thought I was so morbid. They were like, "Your
Good.
mom just died. Like, what are you doing?"
Good.
Um,
Good.
but so this class coincided with the grief group, and my professor basically asked if I could go early once a week, and the professor said no. They said no, you can't leave class early, and I was like, I can't leave this class about death and dying early to go to a grief group because my mom just died. Like,
Wow.
what is wrong with you?
Good.
So I left the class early and I went. But that sort of is important to know because this has always been a space that I've been curious about and
Yeah.
have found um, uh, comfort in, as well as understanding methods of grieving that help me process, which is connecting with others in their
Good.
grief. And
Yeah.
so then, fast forwarding, the summer between my first and second year of business school, I was at a wedding reading a poem about lost loved ones because the bride and I had bonded over losing parents around the same age. We had
Mhm.
met in Aspen after college, and exchanged that experience and really formed a bond over it. And I was reading this absolutely beautiful poem. It brings me to tears every time I read it. A friend of hers had written it about their own situation. And then the morning of the wedding, we found out that one of the guests, one of her really good friends from college, had tragically died the night before. So we were all
Oof.
together Friday for the rehearsal dinner. And then he went out and things happened, and he wound up dead. I won't go into it, but
Yeah.
um yeah, we found that out the next morning, and that was a
The day they were
huge
supposed to be married.
the day they were supposed to be married. As you can imagine, it's like it's supposed to be the happiest day of your life,
Yeah.
and then you find out that one of your friends has died. And the question was like, do we have the wedding? Do you
Good.
still
Good.
go forward and all this stuff? So, and ultimately they did, and it was beautiful. and the poem took on much more meaning. And at the same time too, it was like the it's like literally right as we were wrapping up the ceremony, clouds came out and just like poured like lightning and rain, and it felt, you had to be there, but it felt very
Mhm.
spiritual. It felt like there was presence, and it was being made known just at the appropriate time
Yeah.
to wrap things up. And so it was that experience, it was the juxtaposition of the death at the wedding, having been a former wedding planner, that I was like, huh, funerals and weddings really aren't all that different. There's ceremonies and there are
Mhm.
rituals, and we're honoring people, and there are speeches, and then logistically it's like there are invitations and venues and transportations, and um I have to pick out a tombstone sometimes, and so it was really got my head swirling too, of like, how are they going to send his body back to Massachusetts where he lives? How are they going to tell his parents? Like, will my
Mhm.
friends have to cancel their honeymoon to go to the funeral? And it,
Yeah.
it just, all these questions stirred up. And then um 24 hours later, I was on a plane flying to Alaska to go um, uh, in hiking in the backcountry,
Yeah.
and spent 7 days there, basically pouring rain, freezing, contemplating what had just had happened, and as well as the death of my own mother, because the guide asked us what were the highs and lows of your 20s, and immediately I know my low. It's just so profound. I don't even have a high. Um, but I spent that entire time contemplating, and can go into that deeper too. But then again, not, I had my own. There's so much there. I had uh my own mortality scare where I thought I was gonna die. It turned out I only had a sprained ankle and everything was fine. Um, but that experience then, 24 hours later, going into business school and being prompted to pitch an idea, is where I came up with the concept of wilderness hospice, because throughout that time in Alaska, I had just thought, how peaceful would it be to pass away here in
Ah.
this backcountry, in this beautiful nature. My mom, she got to die at home. Not everyone does. And I thought, I was like, oh, she would have loved this view.
Mhm.
Um, Not that necessarily you're at the time of actual death conscious of that, but um, so then that sparked everything. That class
Ah.
that I was in sparked all this research and opportunity to explore and question, and was really the beginning of all of this.
What a moving and meandering, and I say that in the most respectful way,
Yeah.
story. And so, did you start a hospice?
Yeah. So after I graduated school, I got I discovered this concept of a death doula, right? And you ask, like, what is a death doula? And the definition, Elua Arthur, who I think is like America's best known death doula today, is someone who provides non-medical care and support for the dying and their loved ones. And it's a death doula has been around forever.
Yeah.
Lots of people are death doulas in their own right without
No,
the
the
name and the
label. Yeah.
title. Yeah. But I was like, what is this death doula business? And is this something I might want to be or explore? And so I took the training, and really enjoyed myself connecting with a lot of like-minded individuals, and create, where else do you have a space for a week where you talk about death? And then I came back. At the time, I was living on Cape Cod with my other mom still living, and got word that there was a woman who was opening up a hospice, and I should meet her. And
The-
so he, through the grapevine, got connected. And at the time, they were still renovating the house that had been bequeathed to them to become this hospice home. And
the-
so I joined them to help finish these renovations and get the hospice up and running, and was able to I was hired as the director of operations, but I was
the-
much more in a hybrid role as a caregiver. care
Got it.
provider and director, and ultimately got way more than I bargained for with my doula experience. So I was providing medical care
Mm,
in the sense of administering medicine, which you're able to do in the social model,
got it.
and can explain more of that. But yeah, that's how I
Wow.
got started with all that. So ultimately, I ended up opening a wilderness hospice because it's in Wellfleet, Cape Cod. You can see
Okay.
like the beach, the wooded trees. It's so beautiful. Yeah.
It's like, this is such a strange thought, but as you say that, I was like, oh, if I ever have to go to hospice, maybe I'll go to your
Yeah.
hospice.
I
I'm
mean,
like, that sounds like a cool place to die. Like,
I would love to die there. Yeah.
um, it's funny that we can say that with like, that there's no discomfort in me even making that joke. I'm like, oh, like
Yeah.
that's like, I'll file that in my Evernote somewhere. Um, okay, I have so many questions. I'm thinking about which direction to go. The first, I guess, I suspect most of our listeners know what hospice is, but actually, a genuine question from me is: do you like, if someone has, weeks, months to live, like
Mhm.
do you have a like rough idea of like what percentage go to, or like what percentage of people who die in hospice versus in traditional hospitals? Is there
Oh,
like some kind of like way to gauge the scale of like hospice as a percentage of like total deaths?
yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest, I don't have the exact numbers. There used to be uh, a phrase everyone would say, and I think still say today, which is like 80% of people want to die at home, yet 20% do.
Got it. Yeah.
Um, to give you some idea, but I don't know how accurate those numbers are anymore. And the pandemic changed a lot
Mm,
of that.
yeah.
Um, but I will say most people are actually unfamiliar with the type of hospice that I opened and was working at, which is a
Mm,
social model hospice. It's a
okay.
nonprofit. And while there you people are probably familiar with nonprofit and for-profit hospices, this social model hospice is very different because we are totally not um uh we don't have to deal with billing Medicare. So
Okay.
we're just replacing the home. So you can
Mm,
hospice is a philosophy of care, right? You can get it
yeah.
in a nursing home, in your own home, in a hospital,
Mm,
wherever. But in order to be enrolled on hospice and receive those benefits, you're typically working with a medical hospice that's billing Medicare.
okay.
And we really just built a home for people who didn't have anywhere to go so that they're enrolled with a medical hospice and then they're receiving that medical hospice in our home.
Got it.
Um, but we also the catch is that we also provide 24/7 care, so it gets a little confusing for people. But some people who are staying with us, the reason why they're staying with us is one, they're homeless, they literally
Mm,
have nowhere to go,
oh, wow.
or two, it's so overwhelming for anyone that they do have to take care of them that
Mm,
they come to us so that they're able to you know have some more time back to
mm,
themselves or to be with their loved one, right? Because if you're trying to be a caregiver and
yeah.
grieve at the same time, it's really difficult to do. Being a caregiver
Yeah.
is super intense. And then the other reason is, you even if you have your own home, if you have no one to look after you, hospice
Mhm.
can't enroll you because you need 24/7 care. You need
Got it.
someone that can be there for you.
Got it. The nature of my question was that for a long time, I didn't even know hospice what existed. And
Mhm.
when I had these like real intense fears of dying in my 20s, before I kind of like unpacked it, I like the idea that I had was hospice is like you give up.
Mhm.
And then, being a scientist, being someone of financial means, I was always in my head, I was always like, take every experimental procedure, treatment, whatever, use all the money I have, try to keep me alive as long as possible. That was kind of like the philosophical underpinning of how I would thought about approaching death. And so the fact that someone would be like, no, like, don't give me any experimental anythings. Like, I want to be in my home. I want to feel as comfortable as I can, in light of the circumstances. I was really moved by, you and I share a passion for Frank Ostaseski's book, The Five Invitations, but he talks about being in hospice and they might cook you your favorite meal, and just so you might not even be able to eat it, but just so you can experience the
Smell it.
smells
Yeah.
of it. I'm like getting teary eyed just like thinking
Yeah.
of like what a beautiful way to die. Whereas you could be in a hospital room with like 8 IVs in you out of consciousness, in that, like, all I can think of is the sterile fluorescent lighting
Yeah.
and the linoleum floors. But it's
The
so,
sounds, the smells.
yeah, the smell. And so it's like, it's just because I presume that many of our listeners, and you went to business school, you probably are around a lot of type A driven people, were just like, no, I want, like, do everything in your power to keep me alive as long as possible. Like, I don't want a hospice because then the clock's ticking, right? And we can make a
Yeah.
bigger metaphor, like the clock started ticking the day you
Long
left
ago.
the womb.
Yeah.
So that was, I
Yeah.
asked that as like I don't know if that elicits any
Oh, absolutely.
reaction from you.
Yeah. I mean, I said it in one of my business school classes and I sort of have stuck with it. Hospice has a branding problem.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, not a bold thing to say, but just putting it out there. Like, everyone thinks you go on hospice to die. And certainly that can be the outcome, but many people live a much higher quality of life on hospice than they would not. And take
Jimmy Carter.
Exactly. I was just about to say, over a year. Oftentimes people get on hospice and then they get better. And
That's
simply
crazy. I didn't even know that. And I've worked in hospice.
Yeah, and they get better. And I'm not saying that like they go on to live 5 more years, but I mean, certainly there are edge cases, but you start to look at the person holistically, right? Too, because you're like, what are these medications that you're on, instead of compounding them to solve every problem. And doctors are taught how to save lives. They're not. Medical school doesn't teach you how to care for someone who's dying. It's a totally different type of care and experience. And I mean, it elicits a lot of thoughts and reactions. Hospice is such a beautiful, can be a beautiful experience. There are certainly bad actors, but it's a wonderful benefit. And unfortunately, many people don't know about it, or they think it's giving up hope. So most people enter hospice too late, in my opinion. They enter also without any end of life wishes. And it becomes, becomes kind of crisis mode. When you could really be using it as an opportunity to say, how are we going to make these next 6 months the most comfortable and high quality? And so we have a tradition where we bake. We stole it from the Zen Hospice, founded by BJ Miller, who is like my favorite person, even though I've never met him. No.
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
haven't
like,
either.
he's just incredible. Yeah, I do too. But they bake cookies, at noon every day, and the smell just wafts in the air, and it makes you feel like you're at home. I'm also really biased because the home we built on the Cape is stunning, and these types of hospices really only thrive when you have a tight-knit community, and you also need an affluent community because it's donation based or grants. But like, we have art throughout the entire house, all donated by local artists, and people are constantly bringing over flowers, or our volunteers are incredible. We'd be nothing without our volunteers. So I've never laughed more than I have there, and I did not expect that to happen. It's really a beautiful concept.
Yeah, I share a little bit about my experience in hospice. So I had this extreme fear of death, and then I was like, it was very kind of pragmatic in some sense. I mean, I was very inspired by BJ Miller and Frank Ostaseski,
Yeah.
But I said, well, instead of being so scared of this, I thought it was so beautiful to read about hospice. And I had never heard about hospice really, or considered it up until reading those books in my late 30s. And so I went in to volunteer at a hospice center in LA. And I told you this the first time we spoke, it's just so hard to describe what that experience like. 'Cause people, well, the first thing people will say, even the volunteers, they'd be like, "You're so young." We were like one of the
Yeah.
young, and you're like
I get that.
significantly younger than
The
me.
baby.
And they're like, "Why are you here? Like, why are you surrounded?" It's not like they didn't think it was weird, but they thought it was so uncommon that someone, like, they would say things like, of all the things you could volunteer to do in your 40s, they were just kind of besides it. Like, why did you pick this one?
Yeah.
Right. And so that was like one interesting thing. But the other thing that really struck me about a hospice is I would tell people that I would do this, and I actually don't talk about this a lot publicly because I didn't want this to be some like internet thing to like get kudos from other. It was a very private thing for me, for
Right.
someone who really puts everything out in the open. This was like one thing that I held back for myself. But it was, people be like, that must be so scary, or that must be so sad. And it was one of these experiences where, and I probably volunteered maybe 25 times in a hospice over, 2.5 year period. He couldn't put words to it because it wasn't
Mm.
scary, but there were elements of it that were, ooh, like you would kind of make the hairs on your neck stand. And you would think it was way more sad than it was. And I don't know what to make of that statement, but
Yeah.
I never felt so broken or depressed or anything. I was just like, it was more this like, I don't know that I'm not the best. There's probably some like a special word for low grade sadness, like melancholy is probably like the close. It's not, melancholy is not the word, but something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it was just this really moving experience. So, I mean, I would love for you, I mean, you have a much more immersive experience, but I would love for you to share, is there any particular moment or scenario, or we didn't call them patients. There was a
Residents. Yeah.
resident. Was there like anything that, like, I'm sure there are many, but is there one
Many.
that feels very kind of moving and that you carry deeply with you?
Yeah. I'm just reflecting on some of the residents we've had and my my experience with them. And I laugh because it's just like it's so ridiculous but heartwarming. And um yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that. I get the same thing. Like, people are like, "Oh, it's so depressing. I'd never want to
Mhm.
do that." I'm like,
Yeah.
it's honestly not. It's natural. And if anything, it's helped me to become less afraid of death and
Mhm.
really prioritize what I want out of life.
Yeah.
I feel honored to sit with any resident, to hear their stories, to hold their
Mhm.
hand, to be with them as they pass or transition or
Mhm.
die. There's two in particular that I'm thinking of. One, which was she was our very first resident, actually. And she was very special because um, all of this was brand new to me at the time.
Mhm.
So I was learning and she was teaching me and she was being patient with me. Um, she's a very interesting case, and I would say not the normal case because, to be on hospice, you have a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. To come stay with us at the hospice that we ran, we said 3 months or less
Mhm.
to live, and that's for a few different reasons. But obviously, that's really hard to predict too. There are certain things you can look for, but um, so she came to us with this prognosis of 3 months or less to live. And she came to us, she was 50 pounds. And that was part of the reason why she had been admitted back onto hospice is because she had dropped 5 pounds. And when you're only 55 pounds and you lose 5 pounds, it's a significant amount of weight to lose.
Yeah.
But it had turned out she was on and off hospice for years. And we didn't know that when we had accepted her. And not that that would have changed our minds, but it was really eye-opening to experience and to know. And she had been bedridden also for over 5 years, if not longer.
Wow.
And so she was very used to people taking care of her, changing her, bathing her, all of this stuff. And so she knew immediately when you had no idea what you were doing.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, I had this first experience of her, and that's what I mean, where like I did way more than I think a typical death doula actually does, is I was taking the role of a family member. So
Yeah.
that is what we do. We take the role of a family member, which is why we're able to administer medication, whereas that is not like typically the norm. We make everything made to order as well. So truly a home kitchen, making scrambled eggs, you know, making all these things. And most of them need to be pureed or whatnot. But you'd be surprised the actual meals people are eating up a few days up until they die. It's
Yeah.
very dependent. But she grew up on a farm, so she loved food. Food brought her comfort, and so I'd come in, I would change her, reposition her, make her breakfast, feed her, and she was quite a big spirit. She taught me a lot, how to
Yeah.
care for someone, and we had many conversations. And I remember this one particular moment, and then I'll stop there. But it was coming up around Christmas time, and we had learned from her family that she loved Christmas carols. And so I would play them for her in the room on the iPad, on Spotify, and I would sing. She didn't have any teeth really at all. So that song came on, All I Want for Christmas Is My Two Front Teeth. And I was just singing it to her, and she was kind of like nodding along. And I said, hey, you know, leaving her name out, you know, Christmas is coming up. Christmas is around the corner. What do you want for Christmas? And she belted out. I'm talking like very loudly said to me, from a woman who, again, like sometimes talking, sometimes like mumbling, my two front teeth. And I just burst into tears because she loves food and she doesn't have any teeth. And we had just been like singing this song, and it just hit me to my core. And there were so many moments I had like that with her that really sort of grounded me, and also just like recognized like what the work we were doing here.
Yeah.
And she was just truly such a gem that taught
Wow.
me a lot.
Yeah. Wow. What a beautiful, and there's like these moments of that are like funny, you know, and, you know, kind of out of character. 'Cause,
Mhm.
I experienced some version of that. I wonder if, so, you know, there's kind of like the regrets of the dying, and there's, you know, there's a lot
Mhm.
of stuff that's written. If you threw that all aside and you sat with a lot of people who died and you spent a lot of time with them, what lessons did you get from from being with these people that you could pass on to people who are further away from their death? And they could be, you know, lessons that you've applied to your own life, or just things that people say. It's kind of like, what are Maura's like 5 regrets of the dying based on your experience in hospice? And funny, I actually have the book. Someone gifted me the top 5 regrets. It's
Oh,
under my
nice.
light right there. It's like, you know, pull it out.
Yeah. So, okay, one for sure is that I don't think we act on enough, is, And to me, it's kind of like how the anxiety all ties back to anxiety of death. I'm like, regrets all tie back to not the most common one, which is like not living a life authentic to yourself.
Mm,
But one is the things left unsaid.
mm,
So not getting off your chest what you need to get off your chest. I think that's often why we see at the end of life people just tending to spill lots of stuff sometimes, if you've ever experienced that. And great book that I love is called The Four Things That Matter Most. And that
Never
is
read
by
that one.
Ira Byock, and he's a palliative care doctor. And it's like a bunch of short stories about different patients he's had and
Mm,
experiences that they've had with their families about the four things that matter most, which is saying, and he does it in a particular order. So I'm sorry, Ira, I'm not going to say it in the right order, but it's like, thank you, I love you, I'm sorry, and or like, please forgive me, I forgive you. Basically, like those four simple phrases that are so incredibly powerful. Um,
mm,
and to me, I see that a lot of like regret of, oh, I didn't share this, I didn't say this. Um, I don't know what happened to my light. And that's one for sure. Um, Another one is I worked with a woman who again taught me a lot. Kind of on an unusual case where she came in very alive compared
mm,
to our first resident who had been bedridden for many years.
mm,
Again, they told us she was nonverbal, blind, and you know, not really there. This woman came in very much alive, very much. She also, though, had dementia, so there was a challenging situation where she was what's called sundowning, where often
mm,
people with dementia around when the sun goes down start to get a little bit confused, sometimes
okay.
agitated. And that is at the time when they were dropping her off from the hospital to our
Mm,
hospice. And she was just like, what am I doing here? She hadn't,
mm,
was kind of forgetting that she had agreed to come here. And so
yeah.
we actually ended up having to send her back to the hospital, which was kind of a traumatic experience.
Mm,
But ultimately, she decided to come back again. And she was not afraid to die. She was ready to go,
mm,
and told us as much every single day and asked us, is it time yet? Is it time yet? When is it time? And again,
mm,
there was an added layer of complexity because of her dementia.
yeah.
But, she would have been a great candidate for MAID, medical aid and assistant dying. I think I'm
Mm,
butchering that term. But it's not an option in Massachusetts. And, she said, will you promise to tell me what's happening? Anytime I ask, I want to know exactly what's happening. We said, we
mm,
promise, of course. And of course we did. And we told her exactly, matter of frank. And that was another really transformative experience. Here I was, new to hospice, new to being a death doula, and I
mm,
have a resident asking me, can they die already? Like,
mm.
can we speed things up?
Was it because like wanting to meet God or like to see the
No.
next phase, or
Yeah,
was it just like a terror, like a place of like being scared of the present moment? Or
neither really. She wasn't particularly religious, and she wasn't scared. She was quite honestly bored, uh,
mm,
because there wasn't a lot she could do. Because at a certain point, she became bedbound,
mm,
and she's just ready for it to be
yeah,
over.
yeah,
Because there wasn't. We would offer to read to her, do puzzles, art, watch movies, come out on the deck, like all of this stuff. But again, she didn't have loved ones. She was alone.
mhm,
She didn't have any visitors.
yeah,
She wasn't married. She didn't have kids. And so she didn't really have anyone there to necessarily say goodbye to, which I
yeah,
think might have had an influence on that. But her regrets that she told me was that she had none. She
Mm.
said, none, simply none. And I
Wow.
think I might have conferred like that there was maybe one regret that she had with it not working out in a certain relationship, but she
Hmm.
so matter of factly was like,
Wow.
I lived an amazing life and I am ready to go. And
Wow.
that was that. And I was blown away by her.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I have one last question for you, which is, many of our listeners, we go back to the original question, should we fear death? And so people are listening to this conversation. They're healthy, they're young, they have young families, they have good jobs, but there's this little, niggling part of them that they think about their death and the death of loved ones. And so if you go through whether it's through your experience firsthand, your experience in hospice, things that you've read and studied, like what do you say to that person that has that trepidation and there's a temptation to just kind of push it down? What do you
Hmm.
say to them as a friend, not as like in a clinical way?
Yeah, yeah. Well, definitely don't have those credentials, but I would say it's completely natural. It'd be kind of weird if you were never afraid of death, right? At some point in your life, if you didn't come across these thoughts or feelings. Now, there's definitely if it's impacting your daily life and you're not able to go to work or go on an airplane, that's a whole other level that should probably be addressed. But that the fear of death, it's natural because it's a fear of the unknown, and like anything you've been afraid of before in your life, how did you overcome those fears? How did you move outside your comfort zone? And obviously the answer here is not to experience death. We want to live long, happy, healthy lives, but I say the answer is give yourself to explore that fear, because if
Mhm.
it is root cause an anxiety, a fear of death, that is a fleeting feeling and thought. And so sit with it and use it as a guide or compass to help navigate your life. What are you afraid of? If it's that you're not gonna be able to spend time with your loved ones anymore, and memories are going to be lost, spend more time with your loved ones, make it a priority and capture those moments and memories. Or if your fear of death is that you know you haven't achieved enough success in your life, well, it's like what does that success mean to you, and is it worth you know, deprioritizing all those other things? And I'm not here to say what's right or wrong, but
Mhm.
use it as a
Yeah.
compass and as a guide to help you prioritize the things that matter most to you in life. So, whenever, how many years from now you're on your deathbed, you're able to say that you lived a life on your own terms.
Mhm.
And something that I'll borrow from a Lua is a prompt to give your audience to say, who do you envision yourself to be on your deathbed? Envision yourself there. Who are you? What have you done? Who's around you? um, and then envision yourself now. What is your life like now? Assess what's missing, and then make a plan to try and get there. And it's okay if that plan changes. This is
Yeah.
why it's something I think we should contemplate, you know, on an annual basis, for
Yeah.
me on a daily basis. We'll get there. But it's really the ultimate tool to help you
Yeah.
live a full life right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So beautifully said. It's almost like using it's almost like a pun, right? It's like
Yeah.
using like start with the end in mind, right?
Yep.
And it's like, yeah,
Uh,
I mean, it's like that simple, right? A family, if you want, the kids and the grandkids around you at your deathbed, then you probably want them 10 years before you're gone, and you probably want them right now, right? Or, you maybe don't have grandkids now, but you know what I mean? It's
yeah.
like
Yeah.
make that the priority. It is such a forcing function on what
Absolutely.
matters. And that's such a gift, right? And that's why the people that have kind of like the near death experiences change their lives,
Yeah,
right? Because they got that gift while still getting to, live the benefits, reap the benefits.
exactly. And for anyone who feels, well, that's overwhelming or I don't have the time or whatnot, it's like, it start simple. I always say, what's 5 minutes that you can add into your calendar? It's like there was an
Hmm.
article, New York Times or something, power of the 8-minute phone call. It's like you live
Hmm.
across the country from your parents, you can't see them all the time. I get it. So do I.
Yeah.
But,
Hmm.
if it's important to you, 5 minutes a day,
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
the phone call, send the text, you'll start to feel better.
Yeah. Well, Maura, we can have talked for hours and hours and hours. So I thank you so much. It's beautiful. It's beautiful work and mission. And you just deliver it with such kind of like grace and wisdom and profundity. So I really thank you for just doing this important, work and showing and teaching all of us its importance. So where can people
Thank
go
you.
learn more about you and Hello Mortal? And we'll put it all on the show notes and in the description.
Yeah, best place is hellomortal.com. So HELLOMORTAL.com.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank
Maura.
you.